I saw how important technology was going to be in terms of making financial tools accessible for people. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to spend the next 3 years of my life explaining to people. I'm just going to go try to get started.
All right, Mark Straub. Mark Straub.
Mark Straub.
The CEO of Smile ID.
Like, I almost had this like pit in my stomach as I was starting, like, this is probably not going to work, but I feel like I got to try to do it anyway.
The amount of fraud in Africa continues to grow. It's evolving, and the tactics of fraudsters are changing.
I want to do work that's meaningful and that I feel good about day to day, but also looking back when I try to explain to my kids later on what it was that I did or do.
Companies need to approach this question with a comprehensive strategy that includes modern technologies like AI.
If you really want to do something big and successful and important, there's not really a way to do that without going through an enormous amount of pain.
What's up, everybody? My name is Benjamin. I'm the founder and CEO of Nala. Today on the Build Our Africa speaker series, I'm super excited to introduce Mark. We'll go and learn about his journey from Virginia to London, to journeys and musings around the African continent, to where he's built and founded Smile ID, which is Africa's largest digital ID verification company. So Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been a long time coming.
I know. I feel like if I go all the way back, I remember the time we had coffee at Stanford and we were talking about all the things that could be built. So, yeah.
So Mark and I met, 8 years ago now? I guess 2014, 2015?
Must have been, because we just crossed 7 years as a company. And I think I was trying to recruit you around 7 years ago. So,
He did. I do remember that. Mark would come by campus and just try to talk and learn from with other students and so on. I do remember those coffee chats and conversations. So it's really inspiring to see the journey that you've been on and everything you've built since.
I could say likewise. I'm incredibly impressed by what you've done.
Thank you, Mark. Cool. So let's start with the background. All the way in Virginia. Did you ever think you'd go from Virginia to building this company across the African continent? What things at a young age or as a kid got you really curious about the world?
Yeah, I think I had no visions of doing this or anything like this when I was a kid. I was interested in politics. I was interested in music. I think if I try to connect the dots, my mom, who will probably listen to this podcast, was a sales director for a toy company. It was called Discovery Toys. And she did very well there, and she worked there for 20 years. Of course, one of the benefits of having your mom work for a toy company is you get lots of toys. And they were creative and educational, developmental toys, so always kind of different things for different ages. Anyway, as she was successful, each year, if she hit certain numbers, she got to go on a trip someplace. And so she would get to take one person. So sometimes she took my dad, but then as my brother and I got older, she would take turns taking us places. So when I think I was probably about 12 years old, and I got to go to Mexico for the first time. And then maybe a couple years later, and I got to go to Hong Kong, and we went into China. And this is when Hong Kong was still part of the British Empire, I guess, before the handover. And then we actually also crossed over. We got to see a little bit of China. And I think those traveling experiences, some of them were followed up with other things my family did, really opened up my eyes to the rest of the world. And I remember this conversation I had with my dad shortly after we got to Mexico, and I saw this particular street we were walking down. I said, "There are no sidewalks. How come there are no sidewalks?" And I really didn't understand that. I grew up in a suburb of Virginia, relatively, middle class, upper middle class, and things were relatively predictable. But to see such a different environment really kind of got me asking lots of questions. And I think from there, I began reading a lot of newspapers. I would get into discussions with my family, travel more as I got older. And I got very interested in economic justice. I got very interested in economic development. And I wanted to understand why some people in some parts of the world didn't have access to the same opportunities. So that became a driving force, I think, later for my career.
Then you go to the University of Virginia, and then shortly after go to Bank of America. We had a short stint before joining DFJ.
Yes.
Now, for those who don't know, DFJ has backed some of the most incredible companies around the world. And, Mark got to work there for like nearly 3 years.
Yeah, 4 years almost at DFJ. You missed one thing, though, which was, so after investment banking, but before I did DFJ. Look, iBanking was something I think I did because I needed to pay off my student loans. And it was a path that I saw in front of me because my older brother had done it and done it successfully. And it was a way to quickly make money and sort of get ahead in my career. But I actually quit investment banking after 2 years and I moved to India and I took a 90% pay cut and I went and worked in microfinance. And then during that time, I guess, consistent with the curiosity I had earlier in my childhood, I spent a lot of time traveling around India.
Wow.
And so I've actually been, I think India's got 27 states. I've been to about 20 of them.
Wow.
Ended up much later in life actually marrying my wife, who's originally from India. But
you guys meet on that trip?
No.
Okay.
No, actually, I didn't get to. I met her in California. She eventually, when she was born in India, but moved to the U.S. Grew up in the U.S. mostly. But in any case, yeah. So that trip to India was really important. Not just a trip, I worked there for a year, and that was really important in terms of giving me a chance to actually work on some of those things I'd been interested in when I was a kid. But yes, then eventually I did come back to DFJ, and I came back really because I saw how important technology was going to be in terms of making financial tools accessible for people. Because microfinance 17 years ago was satchels of cash, motorcycles, and Excel. And a little bit of SMS. But mobile money wasn't really a thing yet. And there was certainly, we didn't have smartphones and apps. I mean, the Nokia candy bar phone, I still have mine. Yeah, absolutely. Still works.
Wow.
So, but anyway, yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no. So how'd you go from India? So you're doing this whole microfinance thing there for a couple of years, and then from there to tech investing at DFJ.
Yeah. Well, when I was in India, we actually were investing. I was part of a very small team. It was run by a number of folks based in Delhi, mostly Indians, and there was one Brit who actually helped put the fund together as well. And we were making investments. They were very small investments, but I learned the basics of term sheets and pre-money and post-money and what those things meant and options. So when I came back to the Bay Area, it was interesting, but even though I was getting my first job in Silicon Valley, investing, I actually came in the door with a lot of these tools. And people joke about like it's hard to get into VC. Like, how did you get into VC? I don't know, I was 23 or something. I said I got in through the saffron door. I went to India. So, but it was true. I learned the nuts and bolts of kind of investing in India, and then I was able to apply those when I came back.
Wow. So tell me about DFJ. So you joined DFJ, where you've gone on to invest into many different companies. You know, they've backed many famous people like Elon Musk.
Yeah.
What was your journey investing there like? And from somebody starting off there in Silicon Valley, how did those experiences create and make you shape how you think about the world?
It was a fantastic experience. The team there, so I worked at the Growth Fund. It's just basically like the Series B and beyond. They were making slightly later stage investments, but still venture. And it was an incredible team. The four partners that I worked for, I think all of them had some entrepreneurial experience of some kind. And I spent a lot of time getting to work under investors who had actually built companies or helped run large companies. And so they really understood not just the kind of the vegetables of venture capital, the cap tables and evaluations and all that, but they understood a lot about how companies actually get built and how they improve or they decline over time, and sort of the human element of it too. So it was incredible, sort of, I guess I'd call it kind of a apprenticeship in a way, because VC is kind of an apprenticeship business. And in particular, I worked for a guy named Randy Glein, who eventually was involved in the Elon Musk investment, so Tesla and SpaceX. And Randy just taught me an enormous number of things. The thing that I now apply, and I talk about this with my team members, is when I joined DFJ and they asked me to write investment memos. So that's maybe a 2, 3, sometimes even 5-page document, kind of laying out all the themes of an investment, why you might want to do it, the data points. I remember writing these things out, typing them, and I would give a printed copy to my boss. And Randy, at the beginning of my time there, would take a red pen and mark it up. And for the first 6 months, the page would come back and it would be mostly red. And then, I took the feedback. It wasn't, it wasn't hostile. It was very much focused on learning and improving. I took the feedback and iterated. And I think by, my second year, the page was becoming more and more white. And by the time I left, it was just very minor edits. And so they really forced me. I think the reason why the writing part was so important is it forced me to crystallize ideas. Why do you believe in this particular risk or taking this risk? Why do you believe in this person? Why do you think this is a good business model? That sort of thesis defense was a really good discipline, which actually has served me well in running a company.
With side tangent to your current company, how does that affect the way you push your team today at Smile to make decisions?
Yeah, actually, both the time at DFJ and then later working for Khosla, which I know you wanted to talk about. There was a similar discipline about being able to lay out all the facts and doing that in a concise manner so that you can make decisions. And the thing that Khosla really stressed and that the team at Khosla really stressed is, what's your opinion? Have an opinion. Don't just come to me with a bunch of facts.
What's your point of view?
What's your point of view? Yeah. So now with my team, we've spent a lot of time over the years, and the team's gotten very good at this. And organically within different Slack channels, they've created their own sort of structures. Like, I'm going to ask for a piece of data analytics. I'm going to tell you why I'm making the request. I'm going to tell you which partner it's coming from. I'm going to explain why it's important, how quickly I need the information, right? And so you can quickly sort of put an economic value on why we're doing this piece of work. So I think those things have been very transferable in terms of getting the team good at communication, which when you're running a medium to large size company, especially one that's distributed and virtual, communication is critical. Yeah. And so I think that skill set of communication was very transferable from venture. Maybe one of probably the most transferable skill set.
What was it like meeting Elon Musk?
So I've told this story. People always ask, of course, because he's such a larger than life figure. There's no way Elon Musk would ever remember me, but I certainly remember Elon Musk. So it was after the financial crisis, and this is like 08, 09. This actually probably was 09. I'd have to go back and look at the dates, but both Tesla and SpaceX raised more money at that time. And DFJ was very fortunate that Elon gave DFJ a call, I think largely because there was a strong relationship between Steve Jurvetson and Elon Musk. Anyway, we're there for the meeting. This was regarding SpaceX. And Elon was on one side of the table, and there was like 15 of us on the other side of the table. And everybody wanted to be in that meeting, you can imagine. This is before, Tesla was public. This is before most people knew about SpaceX, but we knew enough about who he was, and this was a very fascinating meeting. The thing I remember most about the meeting that stuck with me over the years is venture capitalists always ask people, well, who are your competitors? And most of you give these answers like, well, either it's this company, it's this startup, it's Microsoft, it's Google. It was the first time I'd ever heard this response. The Chinese government. And people were their jaws dropped. And he said, they are the only ones who can also produce rockets of high quality at low cost. No one else could do that like we can. And so it was such a,
distinct.
It was such a distinct answer and so mind-bending because very few founders think at nation state scale, like, who are my competitors? Well, only a country with 1 billion people. That's my only real competitor. Yeah. Wow. So I think that scale of ambition was something that was, stuck with me.
Quite inspiring too.
Yeah, very much so.
So shortly after DFJ, you went to Khosla Ventures, I guess Khosla Impact as well.
Yeah, we set up a fund. Long story short is, I'd had this great experience at DFJ, and I'd learned a ton. But at that time, DFJ began to focus more on the U.S. and on U.S. software. And I really wanted to get back to working on emerging markets. I still had these very strong passions about economic development and justice, and I felt like I wasn't getting to work on that stuff anymore, even though I was getting to work on incredible things. And I had heard that Venod Khosla, who had invested in another microfinance company at the time I was living and working in India, had made some profits from that company and was going to reinvest them in more things in India and potentially beyond. And so I reached out I think I've told this story before, but I reached out, cold email, explained sort of in like 3 bullets.
You cold emailed Venod Khosla.
I did, yeah.
Okay.
I sent him an email. I said, I work down the street. I think we actually had met once at a microfinance conference in India. I'm sure he didn't remember, but I'd shaken his hand once and I said, I think you should hire me to run this fund. And I said, here's reason 1, 2, and 3. And I basically said, I'm the only person who's invested in competing companies with yours 3 times on 2 continents.
Okay, wow.
Because of the microfinance stuff and some of the things I'd done at DFJ. So interestingly, he responded and said, I'm swamped right now, but I can make time, 2 months from now.
Yeah.
So we ended up having the meeting, and he did about 9 months of diligence on me. And eventually we did
9 months of diligence on you
yeah.
before bringing you on
Yes.
for one employee.
Well, we were setting up a new fund, right? He was hiring me basically to create this new effort, and it was an experiment. And of course, he's busy. He's got 1,000 things he's doing, right?
Yeah.
And this was a relatively small new thing. But yeah, we set up a new fund. It was called Khosla Impact. It made eventually 19 investments. We focused on technologies and products that could benefit the bottom half of the world's economic pyramid. So that was a lot of stuff in India, and eventually we started making some investments in Africa. And I had taken a trip to Africa, it's a vacation, when I was living in India in 2007. And I'd gone back for the World Cup in 2010. And I'd traveled a little bit around. I'd been to Mozambique and Kenya. And I had such great experiences.
He didn't say Tanzania, but we'll let that slide.
I didn't. Well, it took me a while.
That slide.
Yeah, I remember the first time I went to Tanzania. Actually, it was after we invested in Kopo Kopo. Okay. And Kopo Kopo was expanding. And so I went down to Tanzania. And I had some fantastic seafood. And I thought maybe I should go back. So, yeah. And I have gone back now many times.
Yeah. So what was it like working with Venod Khosla?
He's intense. But he's also incredibly passionate about human potential. He's incredibly passionate about technology and progress. And he is like the patron saint of entrepreneurs. I mean, he is all about the entrepreneur. And I even, during the time I worked with him, I hadn't founded a company yet, right? I hadn't been an entrepreneur yet. He would say things, not directed at me, I think, but just in general, things like, why should that person be on the board of that company? What have they done to justify it, to earn the respect of that founder, to be able to help that founder? Of course, I'm sitting there like my heart's beating. Like, why is he letting me in the room? Right? Yeah. But it also, I think, convinced me that if I felt so strongly about some of the opinions I was putting out there about this company or this market, that I needed to put my money where my mouth was, right? My sweat where my mouth was. And so I think that certainly inspired me to want to take the risk to be a founder. But it wasn't until I came upon this particular set of problems and this particular idea that I really got the fire in the belly. But yeah, working with Venod was definitely sort of it was a place where the compass points towards taking risk and building things that are important and ultimately backing it up by doing the work.
I remember the first time I met Venod there was this thing at Stanford where 6 students were selected to meet Venod. So I was like, cool, I've never lived in Silicon Valley. So everybody's like getting ready to go to this thing. I show up in a full suit. Okay? I had a suit, like I think I even had a bow tie, a full suit, and show up there. And all my classmates are looking at me while we're getting to this car to go to see Venod. And they're all like in chill clothing, like t-shirts, sweatpants, whatever, hoodie. And we get there to his office and, we're sitting at the desk. And there's 6 of us, there's him on the other side, and we're each going to introduce ourselves. And then I say, hey, I'm Benjamin from Tanzania. First thing he says, like, hey, by the way, Mahale, Tanzania is one of my favorite places in the world. And I was like, how does this guy even know where that is?
Oh, yeah.
I was so impressed. And then he says, second of all, don't ever wear a suit like that ever again when you come to my office.
Well, 2 things about him. One, he is incredibly well traveled. He is deeply passionate about the environment. He's traveled around. Obviously, he's done safaris. But the other thing is, I don't think I've ever seen anyone in that building other than people from outside that building wearing ties.
Yeah, exactly.
So you definitely stood out.
Yeah, definitely. And so I was like, oh man, I was so embarrassed. I was like, okay, cool, got it. Like, message delivered. I don't think I've worn, I think that's probably one of the last times I probably wore a tie. I can probably count on my hand how many times I've worn it.
It's such a difference, growing up on the East Coast of the United States versus, then I spent a lot of time living on the West Coast. Now I'm here in London, but the dress code is just very different, right?
Yeah.
And I've noticed that, in Virginia, or if you're in DC or Philly or New York, people are expected to show up in a tie and a suit. And in the West Coast, it's often the most successful person in the room is sometimes the one with the hoodie and the flip-flops.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
They're like the billionaire software entrepreneur.
Exactly.
So, it's definitely a different lifestyle.
So at Khosla, you were investing in a couple different African tech companies.
Mm-hmm.
I believe one of them was Flutterwave. Is that correct?
That's right.
What made you push for these African investments?
I mean, the person I should give the most credit for getting me really excited about Africa and Nigeria in particular was E. Most people probably know E. Ian Ilua, he's entrepreneur, was the co-founder of Flutterwave, and before that of Andela, and before that nobody knows this company, but he started a little company called Fora, which was trying to do educational content online, and it was that company which eventually he sort of shut down in the process of starting Andela with Jeremy. So I met him when he was doing Fora.
Okay, wow.
And I sort of watched that entrepreneurial journey, and by the time that we had a chance to invest in Andela. And we passed. And it was actually a really big debate between myself and the other people who were looking at the deal inside Khosla. And I really wanted to do it. And I had some folks on their side who thought, at the time it was Jeremy came to meet with us. He wasn't there. And so it was kind of like, this guy is going to build this company in Nigeria. Does he really know Nigeria? And like all these questions. And of course, there's a lot of experience from India there. And some people were saying, what about Wipro? What about Infosys? Like these companies are going to crush what. And I think the fundamental truth of that idea, the Andela idea, which I think applies to many other opportunities that founders across Africa can take advantage of, is they identified this core economic mismatch, it's inefficiency, which is you got 100,000 open software engineering positions in the United States paying $100,000 a year at least, and you got 40% unemployment in some of these African markets. And if you believe, as the folks at Andela very much do, that, and as they've proven, that genius and intelligence is sort of evenly dispersed across humanity, it's just a question of opportunity and the skills. That's an incredible entrepreneurial opportunity and clearly an inefficient market. So they were able to tap into that. I think there's going to be other opportunities like that. Certainly in the remittance space, I think there's been some great companies built. Nala is certainly building a company like that. So I think having that fundamental insight about a big market imbalance or mismatch, and then the willingness to put the work in, was meeting folks like E, and there was a number of other entrepreneurs. The folks at Kopo also were very inspiring. And those companies and those founders really got me excited about the continent. Even Shola, who we didn't end up investing in, but we looked at very carefully. I mean, it was just another data point of just the quality of the founders.
So you brought the Flutterwave deal to
I brought Flutterwave, all the Africa deals that we did out of Coastal Impact until my partner Sandhya Hegde got involved. All those were mine. Sandhya brought a few like B-Box to the table, but the early ones like Kopo and Flutterwave I brought in.
Mm-hmm. So how did you go from Khosla and looking at investing in Africa to being like, you know what, it's time for me to go into the founder seat and build Smile?
Yeah, I think two things. One was, I talked earlier about that hot burning coal. For me, that was created by experiencing fraud and experiencing it in a big way with a couple of our companies. So this now goes back, almost a decade. So I don't think I'm giving away too much, but there were several significant fraud events inside some of the companies we were involved in. And these companies were otherwise very successful. They were growing, things were working, they had good product market fit, and then boom, money out the door and hard to get it, can't get it back. And in one case, it was petty and systemic, so people stealing $5 at a time. In the other case, it was kind of one-time high-value embezzlement. And these things really, They really upset me. They really frustrated me. Not just because it was like our money and the company's money, but it also is because this is the kind of stuff that holds back the continent, right? This is the kind of stuff, it's like people will write off an entire country or an entire continent, if you listen to Trump, because of one bad apple or one bad actor or a handful of them. And of course, if you don't catch those folks, if you don't hold them accountable or block them from doing it again, then it just creates a perverse incentive for people to go down the wrong path. It creates dishonest paths to success as opposed to honest paths. So I really was upset about this. I have a kind of strong sort of ethical bone in my body that got me really upset about it. And I started talking to people at Facebook about potentially could they do something to fix this? Because people were using, at the time, Facebook logins as the early form of KYC because there wasn't great alternatives. And I actually went to the Facebook campus, took walks on their roof with different members of the team, and got a few people interested in it. But what I realized is during the course of those conversations, I remember getting a question like, I was very excited about what India had done with the national ID system and Aadhaar and UPI and all those, that what's called India Stack now. And I basically had seen within India how once this national ID system was in place, so many problems got solved. From onboarding, anti-fraud, ease of payments, instant payment settlement, all this stuff. And I tried to explain this. And as I was explaining it to this very senior engineer at Facebook, he said, what's India Stack? What's Aadhaar? And I was like, okay, I'm not going to spend the next 3 years of my life explaining to people. I'm just going to go try to get started. The other thing that happened is I met my co-founder. And he had done startups before, and he was much older than me, had more experience, and he was technical. I'm a finance and business guy, even though I've worked with engineers for 2 decades. And I think he had that willingness to say, let's just get started. I think we can build this. So I give him a lot of credit for sort of pushing me over the edge, but those are the things that came together. And yeah, I remember having a conversation with my wife, like, hey, I think I'm going to do this. But I also knew at the same time, I think having been an investor and having seen so many failures and knowing that the average company fails, I almost had this like pit in my stomach as I was starting, like, this is probably not going to work, but I feel like I got to try to do it anyway. Because if it could work, the upside would be really substantial and the impact would be tremendous.
So 7 years later of building Smile Identity, where now I saw recently you crossed 100 million verification, which is incredible. Well done. I know that's no easy feat, and the team's and you've probably been working really, really hard to get there. So well done.
Thank you.
100 million.
Credit to the team.
Yeah, it's huge. And now you've built the largest ID verification company across the African continent. What's that journey been like? It's like a series of sprints that end up becoming just a marathon of sprints over time. And I think as you're trying to build, you're out there among the waves because the market changes and the economy changes and policies change. And so every time you think you're on sort of terra firma, right, there's a new surprise. And so I think that's the one thing that I've just gotten, I wouldn't say you don't get comfortable with it, but you get familiar with it, is that ongoing feeling of discomfort, that there's going to be something else coming around the corner. So whenever things feel a little too predictable and stable, I always worry, like, what's the next, there's going to be something happening
something
soon.
else, right? But eventually you do get better, and the team gets, this is a great analogy, like the weights don't get lighter, you just get stronger. So we get better and better at now anticipating some of the kinds of things that could happen and putting in, whether it's on the product or the integration side, policy side, putting in more and more layers of policy sounds like a bad word, but it's basically like habits. You start putting in habits so that people know that if this kind of thing happens, like, here's the next thing to do. And if you get a question like this, here's a tool you can use to answer the question. And as you build those habits and those tools, the team is able to just take on more and more complexity. So that's been, I think, the most rewarding part of the journey, in spite of the stormy seas that always seem to be on the horizon.
So how many countries can I do verifications in now on Smile Identity?
You can do verification in over 225 countries, the entire world. So we now have products that cover the globe. Obviously, our focus is still Africa.
Continent, yeah.
And within Africa, we have at least 3 ID types that we can verify across every African country. And then within a smaller number of countries, we can actually query data against the local ID authorities.
So in those, what sort of markets do you have that available in?
Yeah, so across Africa, we can do what's called document verification. So verifying a selfie versus a document, checking the security features on the document, reading the document with OCR or optical character reading, and then also doing a liveness check on the person's selfie. And then within a smaller number of markets, 6 countries, we can query either a national ID system directly or a driver's license system or a voter ID system or a bank account system. So we have even deeper verifications we can do in Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, and we just launched mobile money account verification in Zambia.
Nice. So as you go and try to lock in these partnerships, I'm guessing there's a lot of government interaction, and maybe like to get, let's say, national ID access or approvals to validate like BVN numbers or national ID numbers in certain countries. Given that you've done this in so many countries today in Africa, what's the one thing you wish most governments would see that maybe they don't right up front?
I think what there's always a small contingent within the government that gets it. And it's usually the people actually working on the ID system, right? You're preaching to the choir when you go meet with them. And you say, hey, we would like to use this API. We would like to integrate. We would like to put around it this consent layer. We think this could help with all kinds of things, inclusion, cutting down on fraud, giving you an audit trail, telling you how your system's performing, even attracting investment. And that story actually mostly resonates, not all the time, but mostly resonates with the people who are running the ID systems. But they often are very resource constrained. So they don't always have money to invest in new servers so that their API doesn't always go down. And this is the biggest complaint we get from some of our customers is, this ID system's down, that ID system's down. And it's not that Smile ID is down, but the underlying source of truth we might try to be querying in that moment may be offline. Sometimes it's for 2 seconds, sometimes it's 2 minutes, sometimes it's 2 hours. So we put in place things like auto queues and retries and all kinds of tools to try to improve performance. We even have multiple API points, sometimes to different databases within the same country, in order to give customers the best possible chance of having success. But I wish those government officials had access to more resources. I wish more governments took the time and energy to say, this is important. This is like a bridge. We think infrastructure is important. Infrastructure is not just bridges and schools and airports. It's also digital infrastructure. And it's not just fiber optic cables for connectivity. It's also APIs for people to be able to verify data.
And so I saw recently that you guys shipped Smile ID links where you can do validations, and now you have global AML checks as well. And so there's a lot of features and functions that have increased the value of what you're contributing to, like ID verification, not just a random quick ID check, but these value add features. How do you think about that from a product perspective, and why do you think it was important to prioritize those?
Yeah, we had so many people using the core product, so using our APIs to be able to verify, ID numbers in Nigeria or in South Africa or in Kenya. But it's actually the corner cases where we get lots of questions like, hey, I want to try something out in Uganda. Hey, I want to add AML checks to 20% of my verifications, whenever the verification has the following criteria. So being able to give our customers the tools to be able to do very specific things in a handful of markets, not just one market, and to be able to try those things out without having to write a lot of code. So you mentioned Smile Links. It's a no-code solution. So if you have a Smile ID account, you can go into the portal, you can click on Smile Links, and with about 3 or 4 clicks, you can create a full onboarding experience for any of the countries that we support, for any of the ID types that we support, for any of the verification methods we support. So you can actually launch product, let's say, in DRC or in France or in India, and you can do that in a couple of minutes, and you can actually create these fully hosted onboarding experiences without having to write a single line of code.
Now, most people look and decide on different, I've talked to many founders, they're pressured by their investors to make unit economics look really good and like increase gross margins consistently. And as they're deciding on their KYC provider, sometimes they might opt for the cheapest solution, which maybe not all the time is Smile Identity, but in some cases could be. And what's your thoughts on that while people have to make those difficult decisions as founders? Of course, they want the best thing for their customer, but maybe they don't have the financial resources to be able to afford it initially. Like, what framing would you think?
Yeah, I think that the mistake people think is that the only price or the only cost that matters is the price you're paying, let's say, for your KYC check. In reality, it's the total cost of onboarding you should be thinking about, including your cost of acquisition. So we spend a lot of time looking at what we call pass rates. Basically, the percentage of people who attempt a verification or an onboarding that actually get through the verification, they don't get rejected for some reason, right? And what we're able to see is that for our best customers, they're getting pass rates, 75, 80, 85, sometimes even 90%. Well, that's really good because it means that all those customers that they paid marketing dollars for are actually now turning into real customers, as opposed to losing a third of them or half of them at the KYC check. Because if you're spending, let's say you're spending less money per KYC check, but you're only getting half the users through the door, you're actually doubling your KYC costs for every real user, and you're losing the marketing dollars that you're spending for all those customers that don't get through the door. So we actually think about our services as protecting your marketing spend, making sure that you're getting real users and that you're getting as many real users as you can for every dollar or naira or shilling of marketing spend that you're putting out there.
Recently, we've seen different companies like in this space who maybe were building fintech. I think recently Chipper Cash announced building a Smile, like not the Smile, but building an identity product that directly. And, how do you see yourselves competing with companies like that would be, shipping as one of their different product lines, identity solution? I
like the way you said it the first time. Look, I think whenever you have some degree of success and you build something that resonates with people, companies are going to see that and they're going to see if they can also do it themselves. I think one of the things I've learned after 7 years of this is how hard it is. Our business is incredibly complicated. We have to deal with compliance and regulations and device types and OS operating system types that vary dramatically from market to market. We have to deal with different kinds of verification methods, as I talked about, from market to market. And even different languages. You start dealing with Egyptian ID cards, versus those in Cote d'Ivoire, obviously in South Africa. So you've got a real complexity of tools and of products that you have to make work elegantly for your customers. And you got to make them work at a reasonable price with a fast turnaround time. You got to handle the corner cases when there's fraud or when there's a need for human review. And I guess it would be, I think, I can't imagine trying to run a consumer business at the same time I'm running a B2B business, as a non-public company, right? As a non-billion-dollar company or multi-billion-dollar company. I think it's just very difficult to do that well. And I think one of the things that we pride ourselves on is we're very aligned with our customers because we're not also trying to do lending or also trying to do a business that they're in. We're really focused on being a provider to them, not a competitor to them.
Yeah. So it's been 7 years of building. What are 2 or 3 lessons? I'm sure there's thousands that building Smile has taught you about life.
Other people's experience may be different, but I think my experience has reinforced this idea that if you really want to do something big and successful and important, there's not really a way to do that without going through an enormous amount of pain. I think I talked to one founder who said something like, if you want to make $1 million, be prepared to suffer $1 million worth of pain. So, and I think, I don't mean this, I don't want to dismiss people who are going through other types of pain, whether it's, actual pain of losing family members or of medical afflictions. But I do mean just that the day in, day out grind mentally and physically on your health, on your relationships, on the time that you sacrifice from other things that you might be doing is real, and it builds up over time, especially if you're doing something or if you anticipate doing something for a long period of time. So I think I now appreciate sort of the full cost of trying to be successful. And that's something that I think founders, when they look back, they always say, well, if I knew it was going to be this hard, I don't know if I would have done it. I think the NVIDIA founder was famous this past year for saying, I wouldn't have done it again, even though he's got one of the most successful companies in the world. I don't know if I would say that. I'm really glad that I started the company. I think we've had, certainly we're beginning to have some of the impact that we aspired to have. I think there's certainly things I wish I'd done differently, right? And I think any founder, we were talking about this before the break, right? Like, how many mistakes did you make, and like, which ones were the most expensive? And hopefully, those most expensive ones aren't fatal. But inevitably, you make some expensive mistakes, and expensive could mean money. It could mean sinking 6 months of your life into something that you then have to throw away. It could be relationships, the strain that this puts on either relationships with people that you work with or relationships with people in your family. So I think just having appreciation for the true and fully baked cost of building a company is something that I take away from this.
How has building a company affected your relationship with your kids?
Thankfully, my kids are still relatively young. But certainly, I think any founder with kids has had that moment when, their kid says something like, Dada, why are you working still? Or Dada, like, why are you looking at your phone? Right. And you try to minimize those. You try to carve out time. I think it's definitely made me try to be more intentional with the time that I have. And, that means like there's not lots of time for sort of
vibes.
I just don't have much of a social life these days. I don't watch that much TV. It's hard even to get enough time to read a book in a sustained period of time. I do a lot of Audible, right? So it's just forced me to be very realistic about time. And you do, in the middle of all that, have to make sure you maintain your health and take care of yourself, because it's actually, I think the other thing about doing this over long periods of time is that you realize you have to manage not just your time, but your energy. Because you can have a full calendar, you can have it all laid out, but if you show up for meetings and you're just low energy, or if you show up at home and you're low energy, right, that time's not very viable. So I actually probably shortly after the Series B, I just started trying to prioritize like exercise and eating well again. And I'm starting to feel like I'm kind of getting back on good habits.
Yeah.
But it's not always, it's hard to be consistent.
Yeah. So your wife has seen you go through all these challenges. How long have you been married?
It'll be 8 years in April.
So your wife's been there before. So basically, you basically have like 3 kids. Right?
It's almost like our relationship as married couple has spanned the length and the life of our startup. Yeah.
So she's seen you go through all these challenges.
Well, and not only she's seen it. I mean, she also was. There was a period of time before we did the Series A that I was paying myself very little, and she was essentially the breadwinner in the family, and we were able to, have a sort of sustainable life because of her income and her own career.
If your wife was here in the room today, what would you tell her?
I would tell her that I love her dearly, and I'm sure she's going to listen to this, and that I'm incredibly grateful for all of the support that she's given and the sacrifices that she's made to allow us to do this. Because this is much bigger now than me or us. It's all of our employees, our customers, our investors. And so she's essentially been a co-founder too.
So Mark, what matters to you most in life and why?
I want to do work that's meaningful and that I feel good about day to day, but also looking back. When I try to explain to my kids later on what it was that I did or do. And I want to do it with people that I can learn from and that I enjoy spending time with. I think that's what's most important in my day-to-day and when I think about how I spend my time over the course of my life.
So obviously, apart from me, if you were to put together a dinner with tech people in the world that historically, like, you've really admired, I'm joking about.
You're getting the invite?
Yeah.
Maybe you're hosting.
Maybe I'll hosting. That's the only way I'm going to get the invite. Who are the 5 people you want to sit down with be?
I can pick anyone.
Anyone in the world, dead or alive.
Oh, dead or alive. That's way more complicated. I'm going to stick to alive because I think it's just a little more constraining. And I think good ideas come out of constraints. I probably would want Sam Altman there right now just because the world's changing so radically and he seems to be at the forefront of it. I think it'd be interesting to have Barack Obama there because he seems to have a way of channeling a lot of different people's thoughts and feelings and he's able to communicate it well. Jack Ma would be interesting. I think he could speak to not just entrepreneurship, but entrepreneurship from a totally different perspective and part of the world. Well, I didn't think this would be so hard.
Met so many people.
I think just to keep things interesting and also to have some perspective from the African continent. I think Ngozi Okonjo, the economist, would be a nice addition to the table. And maybe somebody who knows something about wine.
to balance it all out.
Yeah, maybe we'll find a good sommelier just to keep things interesting.
Nice. Mark, you talk a lot about identity. And it's, especially as the world's evolved, it's a big question that everybody has. Recently, I had this video where we discussed earlier about my identity and am I African, am I Indian, what am I? And one of the questions I would love
Tanzanian, I think. Right?
Yeah, exactly. One of the questions I'd love to understand for you is, you're American working across the African continent. Do you face any challenges with that? And how do you tie those two things together?
Yeah. It would be, I think the only realistic and honest thing to say is that there's obviously some tremendous advantages I have. You know, white male American, I think we all know that. There's enough historical things that make that obvious and unfortunately true. And then there's also some interesting, perhaps, challenges or limits to what I can do, or rooms that I can be in, or people that I can talk to from a place of openness and transparency. And what I've tried to do is build a team that reflects our customers and our markets as much as I can with all the skill sets we need and all the different functions that we need. And, so we have a team, I think, that probably speaks 10 languages. It ebbs and flows with different folks, but, and comes from, roughly a dozen countries, with some people having dual country backgrounds. And I think that's allowed us to take advantage of the strengths that I can bring from my experience in Silicon Valley, from the work I've done in many different markets, because I have in some ways unique experience of having worked in many different countries, and some folks who come from one market maybe have not had that exposure. And then also take advantage of the local know-how, the local market understanding, the nuances of customer needs and experiences, and also being able to align with policymakers, regulators in the markets that we operate in. I think maybe just the silver lining to this is that I have been very pleasantly surprised that when it happens organically over a period of time, and when the introductions have been made by generally, people who are local to a market from my team, and maybe, let's say, policymakers who are local to that market. And then eventually we have a chance to sit down and to talk about what their goals are, what their objectives are for inclusion, for compliance, for security, for safety, for consent. And we're able to show what we're doing from a product standpoint, from an inclusion standpoint, from a data and insights standpoint. I think we've been able to show that actually we have a lot of things in common, and that our objectives are very similar, even if our backgrounds are quite different. But it does take time to have those conversations, and it's hard to do on a 15-minute Zoom call.
Yeah.
It's much easier to do when you're at a table with some numbers and some shared understanding of what you're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. So where do you see Smile Identity in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, we just crossed 100 million verifications, but that's 1/15 really the population of the African continent. And we've really just been mostly doing onboarding up until now. And as we talk about in the report, a lot of the activity online is now shifting to its transactions, its payments, its high value changes to your account, like adding somebody as a account holder or as a signatory. And so there is much more to be done, not just in terms of onboarding, the rest of the African continent into digital tools and services, but also securing and safeguarding all those transactions that are happening throughout people's daily lives. And that's only going to happen more and more as we do more e-commerce, as we do more digital transactions, just going about our business. So we think that the work that we've done around digital identity will actually have a lot of impact in more stages of the user journey beyond onboarding.
Basically, Mark said he's becoming a payments company over time, which is really exciting.
Actually, well, so I think there's one important thing.
Yeah.
We're not interested in competing with our customers.
Yeah.
I said that earlier. I think it's really important, which means that we don't plan on launching standalone payment services that are going to compete with, some of the companies we talked about. What we are going to do, and what we're already doing, is enabling our tools to be attached to a payment.
Yeah.
And so that will allow you to safeguard a transaction, maybe by asking a user to do something that helps you confirm that payment.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, I mean, that's really exciting. Like, I think, as I always say, payments across the African continent are 1% built. And I think there's so much more that needs to be built just in that journey, but also to protect the customer's finances and validate that these are actual transactions that are happening. And so I'm really excited about that evolvement of the business.
Thank you. We would love to be a provider to all the payments companies, including Nala.
Yeah. Soon. Cool. Well, I do have a final quick fire round of questions here.
Okay.
Given now you live in England now, so sports is a big thing.
Yes.
You went to your first Premier League game.
Actually, my second,
Okay,
but
second.
yes, but I'm still a newbie.
Okay. Have you picked a team yet?
Everybody asks me this. I think I still feel some allegiance to Arsenal because it was my first one.
Oh my goodness.
I know, all the Chelsea fans, including people on my own team, are hating me for this. But I did go to my first Chelsea match recently. Okay. So I feel like I've atoned.
Did you wear the Arsenal jersey at the Chelsea match?
No, of course, no. I was warned. It said on the ticket, do not wear.
Yeah.
Yes, so we read the instructions.
Nice. Cool. So sports is big in Africa. Probably a lot of your team love and follow. They're probably following the African Cup of Nations right now. And
one of my favorite memories, in fact, was being in Mwanza province in Tanzania. I was out there on a diligence trip. This is long ago, looking at a payments company doing something in cotton. And I had to stay at this small hotel. And that night, everybody came out to watch the Premier League game. And I was sitting at this little bar enjoying, I can't remember what it was, Kilimanjaro or something. And just slowly everybody came. And I had the perfect seat. And there was probably 50 people behind me. We were all watching the match. And I will never forget. That was one of my favorite memories.
Wow. Football is huge in Africa. So I have a very important question for you. Ronaldo or Messi?
I'm going to go with Messi. I just love the intensity and the consistency. Messi.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
This guy's killing me. Nike or Adidas?
Definitely Nike.
Okay.
I'm open to with you, yeah.
LeBron or Jordan?
I'm a child of the 80s. Dude, Jordan's the GOAT.
Tea or coffee?
Definitely coffee.
You live in England now.
I like that quote from, the TV show. I always thought that tea would just taste like dirty brown water, and it turns out that it does.
Nigerian jollof or East African biryani?
Definitely Nigerian jollof.
Man, this guy's killing me,
I
man.
But you know what? If we were in Hyderabad and they're serving the biryani at the Charminar, I'm taking the biryani.
Okay. Basketball or football?
I'm a basketball fan.
Winter or summer?
I prefer summer, but skiing is pretty great.
Beach or mountains?
It's hard because it's wintertime right now, and I just, came from taking my son to the mountains for the first time, but I think I prefer the beach. I've spent a lot of time in California.
So, very important one, given you live in England now. Full English breakfast or American breakfast? I think I like to change it up for breakfast, but my preference is American breakfast. Yeah. Got it. Well, Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show. Do you have any parting words to anybody watching?
I'd say for all the founders out there, and I know you have a lot of founders who listen to you, it is a hard, long game. But if you are willing to endure, and if you're willing to learn and make mistakes and then get better, it can be incredibly rewarding, and it's one of the most important things you can do with your life. So I wish best of luck to all the founders listening.
So to the founders, you have your message right there from Mark. Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show today. You've learned about his journey from Virginia to India, to back to America, to Silicon Valley, to getting involved in tech, to meeting Elon Musk, to Venod, and now finally starting Smile Identity, which has built the biggest ID verification company across the African continent. And he said he's just getting started. Lots more to build across the next 5 to 10 years. If you'd like to reach out to him, feel free to shoot him an email. I'll put it in I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but he doesn't know this, but I'll ask him for permission after this show.
I'm also on Twitter.
Okay, find him on Twitter as well. But yeah, if you have any questions or follow-ups, feel free to reach out directly. And if you are watching this and looking at connecting to Smile Identity, they have enterprise solutions that can enable you in multiple countries at once. So feel free to reach out to them directly. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode. Cheers.